There were 17 cars on the grid at Thornfield Estate on the morning of Monday, September 30th, 2024, and $14 million worth of Italian and German engineering was pointed at a 1.8-mile private circuit in the Tennessee Hills waiting for the session flag to drop. Lamborghinis, Ferraris, a McLaren 720S that its owner had driven from Memphis wrapped in a custom satin finish that probably cost more than my annual shop revenue. A Bugatti Chiron that Richard Holt had transported from Nashville on a climate-controlled enclosed trailer because he did not trust Tennessee September humidity with his paint. And at the end of the grid, between the McLaren and the pit wall, a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro in metallic charcoal that I had built in a two-car garage in Murfreesboro over 3 years of nights and weekends while my son Cooper slept upstairs or sat on an overturned bucket handing me tools at 2 in the morning because neither of us wanted to stop. Richard Holt looked at my car from across the grid. Then he looked at me. Then he said something to the man standing next to him. The man laughed. 72 hours earlier, on Friday morning, Richard had said something different. He had said it on the static display lawn with Cooper standing 4 feet away and a gathering crowd of people whose combined net worth could have purchased a small country. He had said it loud enough that it was clearly intended to carry. Cooper was 10 years old. He heard every word. What Richard Holt did not know, standing on that grid with his Bugatti behind him and his certainty around him like a coat, was that the car he was looking at had a power-to-weight ratio better than anything else on that lawn optimized for a short technical circuit. He did not know about the 3 years. He did not know about the LS7 engine, the Brembo brakes, the suspension geometry that my neighbor June had helped me calculate on a Tuesday evening in March with graph paper and a mechanical pencil. He did not know about the SCCA seasons, or my father's body shop, or the specific way that Cooper had learned to read a torque-on-you wrench before he learned to ride a bike. He knew what the car looked like. He did not know what it was. The session flag dropped at 9 a.m. I need to tell you about my father first, because this story has his fingerprints on every part of it. Raymond Shaw opened his body shop in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, in 1974. A 2-bay operation on the south side of town that he ran for 31 years until his hands gave out enough that the detailed work became impossible, and he handed the keys to his lead technician and retired to a house 3 miles away where he spent his mornings drinking coffee and reading, and his afternoons in the driveway doing things to a 1967 Chevelle that technically qualified as maintenance, but were mostly a way of staying close to something he loved. He had 2 beliefs about cars that he never stated directly but communicated so thoroughly through practice that by the time I was old enough to understand them, I had already been living by them for years. The first was that American iron built between 1964 and 1972 represented the highest expression of what a car could be as an object. Not the most sophisticated, not the most technologically advanced, but the most honest. These were cars built by people who understood what they were for, and built them to do exactly that without apology or excess. The second belief was more specific and more important, that understanding a car completely, not just how to fix it but why it was built the way it was, what decisions had been made and why, what the engineers had been trying to accomplish and where they had succeeded and where they had compromised, was a form of intelligence that no credential could manufacture and no amount of money could purchase. You either had it or you didn't, and the only way to get it was to spend time with the machines themselves, hands-on, paying attention, for long enough that the knowledge became instinct. He taught me this not in a classroom and not in speeches. He taught me the way he taught everything, by letting me stand next to him while he worked and handing me a tool when I was old enough to hold one and trusting me with more responsibility as I demonstrated I could be trusted with it. By 16, I had rebuilt 2 engines. By 19, I was doing restoration work that clients drove from, 3 states to commission. I spent those years between 19 and 25 working out of my father's shop, not as his employee exactly, but as someone who had outgrown the apprentice designation and had not yet built the client base to justify his own space. My father gave me a corner of the shop and stayed out of my way, which was the most useful thing he could have done and which I understood only much later was a deliberate decision rather than indifference. I opened Shaw Automotive in 2006 at 25 years old. a three-bay independent shop on the south end of Murfreesboro that specialized in American muscle restoration and performance builds. We were not the biggest shop in Rutherford County. We were the one people called when they wanted it done right. My father came to the shop every Tuesday morning for 8 years and drank coffee at the workbench and watched what I was doing and said very little unless I asked him something. He died in 2018 at 70 years old from a heart attack on a Thursday afternoon. He was in his driveway working on the Chevelle when it happened. I finished the Chevelle that spring. It took me 4 months. I did not rush it. I met Sarah in 2009 at a car show in Nashville. She was there with her brother who collected vintage motorcycles, and she had somehow ended up in the muscle car section looking at a 1970 Boss 302 Mustang with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely trying to understand what she was looking at rather than performing appreciation. I walked over because I had never seen anyone look at a car quite that way who wasn't already in the business. We talked for 2 hours. We married in 2012. Cooper was born in 2014. Sarah was a high school history teacher who had no mechanical background whatsoever and who approached the shop the way she approached everything she didn't understand, with systematic curiosity and without pretending she knew more than she did. She learned what she learned because she asked questions and listened to the answers, and within 3 years of being around the shop she understood enough to have opinions that were occasionally more accurate than the opinions of people who had been in the business for decades. She was diagnosed with leukemia in the spring of 2018, the same year my father died, which was the kind of convergence that doesn't mean anything and is nonetheless very hard to carry. 18 months of treatment. Cooper was 5 when she died in November 2019. He is 10 now. He has her curiosity and my stubbornness, and an ability to concentrate on a mechanical problem for sustained periods that occasionally unsettles adults who expect children to be distractible. He grew up in the shop and in the garage the way I grew up in my father's body shop. Not as a visitor, not as someone being supervised, but as a participant. By 8 years old, he knew the difference between a standard and a metric fastener by feel alone. By 9, he could read a torque spec and apply it correctly. At 10, he was involved in the final stages of the Camaro build the way a junior member of a team is involved. Not doing the critical work alone, but present, capable, and genuinely useful. He called the Camaro the project. He had called it that since the beginning, in January 2021 when I bought a 1969 Shell from an estate sale in Shelbyville for $8,000 and put it in the corner of the home garage and looked at it for 3 months before I touched it. When I finally started, he was 6 years old. He grew up with the build the way some children grow up with a younger sibling. Aware of its progress, invested in its development, present for its significant moments. He was there the night the engine ran for the first time in February 2023. He was there the morning we got the suspension geometry right in October of that year, and the car came off the lift and sat at the correct ride height for the first time, and we both stood back and looked at it, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. He was 10 years old, and he understood what 3 years of work looked like when it was finished. I need to tell you what I built, specifically because the story doesn't make sense without it, and because a 55-year-old American muscle car beating a Bugatti Chiron on a private track in Tennessee requires an explanation that holds up. The 1969 Camaro I purchased from the Shelbyville estate was a shell, no drivetrain, no interior, bodywork that required significant work before it could be considered structurally sound. I bought it for the bones. The unibody construction of the first-generation Camaro, properly reinforced, is one of the most competent platforms in American automotive history for a performance build. My father had told me this in 1994. He was right. The engine is a GMLS 7, the 7.0-liter naturally aspirated V8 that General Motors used in the 2006 through 2013 Corvette Z06. 505 horsepower in factory specification. My example, built by a specialist in Smyrna, Tennessee named Curtis Webb, who has been building LS engines for 22 years, produces 551 horsepower on a conservative tune. Curtis does not believe in aggressive tunes. He believes in reliability and repeatability, and so do I. The suspension is a full coilover conversion, ride tech system front and rear, set up for track use, with subframe connectors that tie the unibody into a structure rigid enough to respond predictably to suspension inputs. The geometry was calculated with June Calloway's help. June spent 30 years as a mechanical engineer at a defense contractor in Smyrna before retiring in 2020, and she has the specific gift of people who have spent decades solving real engineering problems. She knows which variables matter and which ones are noise. The brakes are 6-piston Willwood units front and rear with slotted rotors. The tires are Hoosier A7 competition tires on 15-inch wheels. Not road legal in most jurisdictions, not appropriate for street use, completely appropriate for exactly what I intended to use them for. The curb weight is 2,842 pounds, with 551 horsepower that gives a power-to-weight ratio of approximately 5.16 pounds per horsepower. For comparison, a Lamborghini Huracan Evo has a power-to-weight ratio of approximately 6.4 pounds per horsepower. A Ferrari 488 Pista, 5.8 pounds per horsepower. A McLaren 720S, 5.6 pounds per horsepower. Now, the Bugatti Chiron. On paper, the Bugatti appears to win this comparison decisively. 1,500 horsepower, approximately 4,400 pounds. A power-to-weight ratio of approximately 2.93 pounds per horsepower, nearly twice as favorable as the Camaros. But the Bugatti Chiron is built for one thing: sustained ultra-high-speed performance on long straights. At the speeds above 200 miles per hour, it has no equal in production automotive history. On a 1.8-mile technical circuit with 8 corners and a longest straight of 800 feet, it weighs 4,400 pounds and runs on road. Biased tires designed for compliance and longevity rather than mechanical grip. Its massive weight is a disadvantage at every braking zone and every corner entry. Its road tires cannot generate the lateral grip that a competition tire produces. Its driver, a wealthy enthusiast, not a professional, is managing a car built for a different environment entirely. Power to weight on a short technical circuit is only part of the equation. Mechanical grip, weight distribution, and tire compound are the rest of it. On the Thornfield circuit, the Camaro's combination was not just competitive. It was, on paper, dominant. I had also done 3 seasons of SCCA regional racing in 2015, 2016, and 2017 in a 1993 Mustang GT that I had built specifically for that purpose. A different car entirely from the Camaro, but the experience of learning a circuit, understanding what a car will and won't do at the limit, and developing the specific patience that separates fast drivers from crashed ones is transferable regardless of what you are driving. When Sarah was diagnosed in 2018, the travel that SCCA racing required became impossible. I stopped racing. The knowledge stayed. I had never put the Camaro on a track. I had been waiting for the right moment. Yeah, I heard about the Thornfield Invitational through George Whitfield. George had been a client of Shaw Automotive for 4 years. He brought his personal vehicles to me because someone in his network had told him I was the best in Rutherford County, and he had found this to be accurate and had continued on that basis. He was a real estate developer, 63 years old, the kind of man who had made a significant amount of money and had the specific self-confidence of someone who no longer needed external validation to feel certain about his assessments. He had seen the Camaro build in progress on 3 visits to the shop. He had asked intelligent questions about the build specification each time and had received straight answers. In August 2024, he called me and said he wanted me to bring the car to Thornfield at the end of September. He said he thought it belonged there. He said it in the matter-of-fact way of a man who had decided something and was communicating it rather than proposing it. I said I would think about it. Cooper, who was present for this conversation, said nothing until after the call ended. Then he said, "Are we going?" I said I was thinking about it. He said, "The car is ready." He was right. The car had been ready for 6 months, and I had been finding reasons that it wasn't. Not mechanical reasons. The car was mechanically complete and sorted. Other reasons, the kind that don't fully survive examination when a 10-year-old states the obvious plainly. I called George back the following day and said yes. We arrived at Thornfield Estate on Friday morning, September 27th, with the Camaro on an open single-car trailer pulled by my work truck. Cooper was in the passenger seat with the event schedule on his knee, reading through it with the systematic attention he brought to printed material. The estate was what George had described: 2,400 acres in the rolling hills south of Franklin, the kind of property that in Tennessee means a particular combination of old money, new money, and the specific aesthetic of people who have decided that the landscape itself is the statement. The main house was visible from the entrance road, a stone and timber structure set back from the driveway with the unhurried permanence of something built to last rather than to impress. The display grounds were set up on a flat section of the south lawn, the cars arranged on the manicured grass in the morning light. 17 cars. The combined value, based on my conservative estimates as we drove past them, was somewhere above $12 million. I had paid $8,000 for the car I was about to put in the middle of it. I found my assigned spot. George had placed it deliberately and with full knowledge of what he was doing. The Camaro went between a Ferrari SF90 Stradale and the McLaren 720S. I backed it off the trailer and pulled it into position and got out and began removing the tow straps. Cooper came around from the passenger side to help with the wheel chocks. Richard Holt I recognized from the event photographs George had sent, 57 years old, built with the particular solidity of a man who had been athletic in his 30s and had carried the frame of it into his 50s, wearing a polo shirt with the Holt Performance Group logo on the chest. He was standing 20 feet away with two other men when he noticed the Camaro being unloaded. He walked over. He looked at the car. He looked at my work truck. He looked at me, the work jacket, the hands that no amount of scrubbing had entirely cleaned, the trailer that was a commercial flatbed rather than the enclosed climate-controlled units that most of the other cars had arrived in. He said, to the men with him rather than to me, in the carrying voice of someone who has decided the subject of the comment is not worth addressing directly. "George is getting sentimental in his old age. Inviting the help?" One of his companions laughed. The other looked at the ground. Cooper had come around the front of the car. He was 4 feet from Richard Holt. He was 10 years old and he had heard every word, and he was looking at his father with the expression that children have when they are deciding how an adult is going to respond to something that clearly requires a response. I straightened from the wheel chock. I looked at Richard Holt for a moment, not with anger, with the specific attention of someone taking accurate inventory of what they are dealing with. Then I looked away. Richard, perhaps unsatisfied with the absence of a reaction, said louder to the broader group that had begun to drift toward the commotion, with the social magnetism that conflict produces in environments where everyone is watching everyone else. "Somebody tell me what a Murfreesboro body shop is doing at my event." I closed the tailgate of my truck. I looked at Cooper. Cooper was still watching me. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the thing his mother's eyes used to do when she had decided something and was waiting to act on it. I said quietly, just to him, "Help me get the cover off." We pulled the car cover off together, Cooper at the front, me at the rear, the practiced motion of two people who have done this enough times to move in coordination without direction. The Camaro came into the September morning light in its full form, charcoal paint laid by my own hand over 3 coats of primer and 2 weeks of blocking. No chrome excess, no vanity additions. Just the car exactly as it was built, exactly as it was intended to be. George Whitfield had been watching from 30 feet away with his coffee. He walked over now, unhurried, with the gait of a man entirely at ease on his own property. He looked at Richard. He looked at the car. He said, in the quiet tone of someone making a statement rather than having a conversation, "Richard, that car has a better power-to-weight ratio than anything else on this lawn for a circuit like yours. You might want to keep that in mind come Monday morning." Richard looked at George. Something moved across his face. A calculation being run, a reassessment being considered, and then set aside. He said something that produced a laugh from his companions and walked back toward the Ferrari SF90. Cooper watched him go. Then he looked at the Camaro. Then at me. He said, "Are we on the track day list?" I said yes. He said, "Good." He pulled the car cover the rest of the way off and folded it with the specific neatness of a 10-year-old who has been taught that how you treat your equipment reflects how seriously you take your work. He put it in the truck bed. He came back and stood beside the car with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at it in the morning light with the evaluating calm of someone assessing whether 3 years of work had produced the thing it was supposed to produce. Apparently, it had. He nodded once and went to get breakfast from the hospitality tent. Friday afternoon, I walked the track. All 1.8 miles of it, on foot, twice. I took the small notebook I carry in my jacket pocket and I made notes at every corner. The surface texture, the camber angle, the sight lines, the elevation changes. The track had been built in 2009 by Georgia's contractor to a reasonable but not professional specification. It had the characteristics of a track designed by someone who understood racing intellectually rather than experientially. Good bones, a few compromises, 3 corners where the line that looked obvious was not the fastest line. I walked it a second time to confirm what I had found the first time. Darnell arrived Friday evening. He drove down from Nashville in his F-150, pulled into the paddock area at 7 p.m., and walked straight to the Camaro without stopping to greet anyone. He crouched at the right front corner and looked at the tire for a moment. Then he stood up and looked at me. He said, "Pressure's set?" I said, "Not yet. I was waiting to see the overnight temperature." He said, "Smart." Darnell Price and I had known each other for 22 years. He had spent 23 years in NASCAR fabrication, starting as a welder at a Cup team in 1995 at 22 years old, retiring in 2018 as a lead fabricator with 4 championship seasons on his resume. He was 51 years old and had the specific knowledge of someone who had spent 2 decades making race cars go faster under conditions where going faster was the only acceptable outcome. He had been part of the Camaro build for the last 18 months, coming down from Nashville on specific weekends when I needed a second opinion on something I wasn't certain about. He had never once told me the car wasn't good enough. He had told me 17 times that specific things weren't good enough yet. That was the distinction that mattered. We went over the car together in the paddock Friday evening. Brakes checked, fluid levels verified, suspension settings reviewed against the track notes. We talked about the specific corners where I thought the car's characteristics would be decisive. Darnell listened with the attention he brought to all technical conversations. Complete, unhurried, processing. He said, "You know what's going to happen out there." I said, "I know what the car can do." He said, "That's what I mean." He paused. "Don't waste the first session. Use it." I said, "I plan to." He said, "I know you do. I'm saying don't let what happened Friday morning make you use it wrong." I looked at him. He said, "The car wins this on the clock, not on attitude. You know that." I did know that. I appreciated him saying it anyway. Cooper was asleep in the accommodation George had arranged by 9 p.m. I sat outside for a while in the dark with the September Tennessee night around me, cool and clear, the kind of night that doesn't come until the heat of summer has finally finished its argument with the calendar. I thought about my father. I thought about Sarah. I thought about 3 years of Saturday mornings and Tuesday nights and the specific smell of the garage in winter when the space heater was running and the coffee had been sitting too long. Then I went to bed. June Calloway arrived Saturday afternoon. She had driven herself from Murfreesboro in her 2019 Subaru, navigating with the calm competence of a woman who has been going exactly where she intended to go for 68 years and has no patience for drama about it. She found the paddock, found the car, found me underneath it, checking the exhaust clearance on the right side, and set up her camp chair beside the rear quarter panel with the ease of someone who had done this before. She had done this before. She had been in that same camp chair in my driveway on the evenings when we were setting the suspension geometry, producing numbers from her notebook with the unhurried precision of a retired mechanical engineer who no longer had anyone to impress and could therefore be entirely accurate without performing accuracy. She said, "How does the track look?" I told her what I had found. The 3 corners where the non-obvious line was faster, the surface change at turn 4 that would require patience, the elevation drop before turn 7 that would let the car carry more speed than a driver unfamiliar with it would expect. June listened with her coffee. Then she said, "Your father would have liked this car." I said, "He would have said the suspension geometry was wrong." She looked at me. "He would have been right about something being wrong. Not about what?" I almost smiled. My father had strong opinions about suspension geometry that were correct approximately 70% of the time and delivered with the certainty of someone who was correct 100% of the time. June had met him twice and had assessed this accurately on both occasions. She said, "He still would have liked it." I said, "Yes, he would have." Cooper came over from wherever he had been and sat on the ground beside June's chair. He had his notebook out, his own notebook, a small green one he had started keeping sometime in the previous year, which he used for things he wanted to remember. He was reviewing the track notes he had made when he walked the circuit with me on Saturday morning. He had walked it once and made notes that were, on 3 of the 8 corners, more detailed than mine. June looked at what he was writing. She said, "That's right about turn 6. Cooper looked up. "The late apex?" She said, "The late apex." Cooper wrote something else in his notebook. June looked at me over the top of his head with the expression of a woman who has spent 30 years around engineers and recognizes a specific kind of mind when she sees it working. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Sunday evening, I set the tire pressures for the forecast Monday morning ambient temperature, 51 degrees Fahrenheit based on the Weather Service reading for Franklin. Cooper held the gauge and read the numbers. We had done this enough times that the procedure required no instruction and no supervision. He read, I adjusted, he confirmed. 4 tires, correct to specification, ready. Richard Holt came through the paddock at some point during the late afternoon in a golf cart with 2 companions. He slowed when he reached the Camaro's paddock position. He looked at the car for a moment. He did not stop. He continued on. Cooper watched the golf cart until it was out of sight. Then he looked at me. He said, "He's worried." I said I didn't know that. Cooper said, "I do." I looked at him. He was 10 years old and he had his mother's ability to read people, and he was probably right. I said we should get dinner. He said, "After you check the brake fluid." I checked the brake fluid. Then we got dinner. Monday, September 30th, 2024. I was at the car at 6 a.m. The paddock was quiet. Most people didn't arrive until 7:30 or 8, and the first session wasn't until 9. The morning was 50 degrees and the September light was low across the Tennessee hills in the way that makes everything look like something worth paying attention to. I walked around the car once, then I sat on the pit wall with coffee and looked at it. I thought about the first time I had seen it in the corner of the Shelbyville barn in October 2020. A shell, no drivetrain, bodywork that most people would have walked past without stopping. I thought about January 2021 when I pulled it into the home garage and started disassembling what remained of its original components. I thought about the night in February 2023 when the engine ran for the first time, and Cooper had come downstairs in his pajamas because he had heard it start and he wanted to be there for it. I thought about my father in his driveway with the Chevelle, about Sarah reading about the Boss 302 at the Nashville car show with the focused attention of someone genuinely trying to understand, about what it meant to build a thing properly and then let it do what it was built to do. Darnell arrived at 7. He poured coffee from the thermos he had brought and stood beside me and looked at the car and said nothing for a few minutes. Then he said, "Track temperature's going to be good by second session." I said that's what I was thinking. He said, "Use the first session like we talked." I said I would. Cooper arrived at 7:30 with June. He was wearing his jacket and carrying his green notebook and his stopwatch, purchased with his own birthday money from his grandmother, specifically for this weekend. He had told me he wanted his own timing record independent of the electronic system. I had said that was a good idea. He had said he knew. The first session went out at 9 a.m., 17 cars, open track, passing permitted at designated zones. I went out in the 5th group. The track was cold, 52 degrees ambient, surface temperature lower. I drove 2 laps at 80% of what the car could do, feeling the track under speed, confirming the corner notes, learning the specific way this surface communicated through the steering. The Camaro told me things in those 2 laps, things about the track that you cannot learn walking it, that exist only in the relationship between a specific car and a specific surface at a specific temperature. The lap time board at the end of the first session showed the Camaro 14th of 17. The McLaren 720S was fastest, the Bugatti second, a Ferrari 488 Pista third. Richard Holt was at the pit wall with his group. He saw the timing board. He said something. I did not look at him. I was making notes in my jacket pocket notebook. The 2 laps had told me 3 things I had not known from walking the track. At turn 3, the surface had a compression at the apex that wanted to push the car wide. I needed to rotate the car 10 feet earlier than I had planned. At turn 5, the elevation rise was steeper than it looked on foot, which meant I could brake 15 feet later than my walking notes suggested. At turn 7, the late apex that June and Cooper had identified was more aggressive than I had been planning. The car could carry significantly more speed through it than I had allowed for. I updated my notes. The first session had cost me nothing. It had given me everything I needed. Cooper was at the pit wall when I came in. He showed me the stopwatch. He had timed my laps. The times matched the electronic board within 1/10 of a second. He looked at me and said nothing about the position. He understood why the position didn't matter yet. Darnell looked at my notes. He said, "Turn 3?" I said yes. He nodded. He had thought there might be something there from watching the other cars. He said, "Go get it in the second session." The second session went out at 11 a.m. The track temperature had risen to 61 degrees. The Hoosier 7S were in their working range. I went out in the second group. The first lap I drove at 95%. Not because I was being cautious, because the first lap of a session on a warming track is a data lap, and treating it as anything else is how you make mistakes that cost you time rather than give it back. I confirmed everything from my revised notes. Turn 3, early rotation. Turn 5, late braking. Turn 7, the aggressive late apex that carries you onto the following straight with a speed that the conventional line does not produce. The second lap, I drove the car. Coming out of turn 4 onto the back straight, I had the LE's 7 at full output. 551 horsepower through a car that weighed 2,842 pounds. The Hoosiers loading up with the specific mechanical grip that competition tires produce when they are at temperature and being asked the right questions. The acceleration on that straight was not the acceleration of a 55-year-old car. It was the acceleration of a purpose-built machine that had been constructed from first principles by someone who understood exactly what he was building and why. The Ferrari 488 Pista was ahead of me entering the back straight. Not significantly, 20 car lengths running its line. I was closing at a rate that the Ferrari driver did not expect, because Ferrari drivers at private track days do not expect to be caught by 1969 Chevrolet Camaros. I caught him before the braking zone for turn 5. He moved to the outside. I went through on the inside and came out of turn 5 with the gap I needed to be clean into turn 6. The Ferrari driver, to his credit, did not do anything stupid. He let it happen and followed me through the remainder of the lap. I respected that. The McLaren 720S was the fastest car in the first session, and its driver had 3 laps of experience on this track. He was running clean and fast at the front of the group. I caught him at the end of the second lap, came through turn 8 and found him entering the pit straight and stayed behind him for the third lap, learning his lines and his braking points and the one place where he was leaving time. Turn 6, where he was taking the conventional line and carrying less speed through the apex than the corner allowed. Fourth lap, turn 6. I braked at my mark, 15 feet later than conventional, the late apex that June and Cooper had identified, the line that looked wrong at walking speed and was correct at racing speed. I rotated the car, hit the apex, and came out of the corner onto the following short straight with enough speed that I was alongside the McLaren before the braking zone for turn 7. The McLaren driver saw me. He moved, not defensively, correctly, the way a skilled driver adjusts when a faster car comes alongside. He gave me the line at turn 7 and I took it and drove away from him through the remainder of the lap. I did not look at him as I went past. I was looking at turn 7 and driving the car. The lap time board at the end of the second session showed the Camaro third overall, the McLaren first, the Bugatti second. The paddock had a specific quality to it when I came in. Not silence. People were talking. Engines were running. But a different quality of noise, the way a room sounds when the conversation has shifted from what it was about before something happened to what it is about after. Darnell was at the pit wall. He looked at the timing board. He looked at me. He said nothing. He handed me the water bottle and looked at the timing board again. Cooper was timing. He showed me the stopwatch. He said, Third. I said, third for now. He looked at me. Third session? I said, one more session. He wrote something in his green notebook. 1 p.m. Third session. Final session of the day. I went out in the first group. I want to tell you about that lap, the one that ended up at the top of the timing board, not because the numbers matter, though they do, but because of what it felt like to drive it. 3 years of work. Nights after Cooper went to sleep, and mornings before the shop opened, and weekends when Darnell came down from Nashville, and the two of us argued about suspension settings over cold coffee in a garage in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, my father's body shop. Sarah reading about a Boss 302 at a Nashville car show in 2009 with the attention of someone genuinely trying to understand. Cooper, at 6 years old, handing me a 10mm socket at 2 in the morning because neither of us wanted to stop. Everything that had been built into that car over 3 years was in that lap. I drove through turn 1 the way my notes said to drive it, through turn 2. I hit the compression at turn 3 with the early rotation that the first session had taught me, and the car responded the way a car responds when it has been built correctly and is being asked correctly, with a precision that feels, when you are inside it, less like machinery and more like intention. Made physical. The back, straight at full output. The late braking for turn 5. Through turn 6 on the late apex, the car loaded and committed and going exactly where I pointed it. Through turn 7 with the speed that the conventional line does not produce. Through turn 8 and onto the pit straight. I did one more lap to confirm the first. It confirmed. I brought the car in. The timing board updated while I was still in the pit lane. Cooper was at the wall with his stopwatch. He looked at the board. He looked at the stopwatch. He looked at the board again. The Camaro was fastest. Not third, not second. Fastest of the day. Fastest of all 3 sessions, across all 17 cars, including the Bugatti Chiron that Richard Holt had transported from Nashville on a climate-controlled enclosed trailer because he did not trust Tennessee September humidity with his paint. The gap to second place was 1.4 seconds. In racing, 1.4 seconds is not close. 1.4 seconds is a different conversation entirely. The paddock went quiet for approximately 4 seconds. I have been around racing long enough to know what 4 seconds of paddock silence means. It means the people who know what they are looking at have just recalibrated something they thought they understood. Then the noise came back. Different noise than before. Cooper put the stopwatch in his jacket pocket. He did not say anything. He walked to the pit wall and leaned against it beside the car with his arms crossed, and he looked at the timing board with the expression of a 10-year-old who has been waiting 3 years for a specific number to appear and has just watched it appear. He didn't celebrate. He didn't shout. He just stood there and looked at it, the way you look at something you have been working toward for long enough that the arrival of it feels less like surprise and more like confirmation. I got out of the car. Darnell was there. He put his hand on my shoulder and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Your father would have had something to say about the turn 3 rotation." I said, "He would have been wrong." Darnell said, "Absolutely." He almost smiled, but he would have said it. George Whitfield found me in the paddock while I was cooling the car down. He shook my hand with both of his. He said, "I told him Monday morning." I said, "You did." He said, "He's coming over." I looked across the paddock. Richard Holt was walking toward us. He was alone. No companions, no group. Just him, walking in the specific way of a man who has decided to do something that requires something from him and is in the process of summoning it. He stopped in front of me. He looked at the car. He looked at the timing board, which was still displaying the session results. He looked at me. He said, "What's the build spec?" It was not what I expected. Not an apology. Not yet, and maybe not ever, in those words. But a question asked by a man who understood cars well enough to know that the correct response to being beaten by something he didn't understand was to understand it. I told him. The LS7, the Willwoods, the Ride-Tech suspension, the Hoosiers, the weight, the power-to-weight ratio, the 3 years. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Cooper, who was standing beside me. He said, "Friday morning, what I said." He paused, the pause of a man doing the work of finding words that were accurate without being performed, which is harder than most people realize. That was wrong. I was looking at the wrong things. Cooper looked at him. 10 years old, his mother's eyes, 3 years of Saturday mornings in a garage in Murfreesboro. He said, "My dad builds things right." Richard Holt looked at Cooper for a moment. Then he nodded once. He looked at me. He said, "I can see that." He walked back across the paddock. June was in her camp chair with her coffee. She had heard everything. She did not say anything until Richard was out of earshot. Then she said, "Your father would have appreciated that." I said, "The apology or the lap?" She said, "Both, but mostly the lap." 2 weeks later, a Saturday morning in mid-October, the Camaro was back in its spot in the home garage in Murfreesboro. The Thornfield weekend was done. The car had come home on the trailer and gone back into the garage where it had been built and where it belonged for now, until the next time. Cooper was at the workbench doing homework. He did his homework in the garage sometimes because the garage was where he concentrated best. The smell of it, the specific quiet of it, the particular quality of a space where serious work had been done and serious work was ongoing. He had been doing this since he was old enough to sit at the workbench, and I had stopped questioning it years ago. I was working on a client car, a 1971 Chevelle that had come in for a fuel system rebuild. Ordinary work, the kind that keeps a shop operating and that I find as satisfying as any other work because ordinary work done correctly is its own form of accomplishment. June was in her camp chair. She had started coming on Saturday mornings sometime in the spring, and I had started making enough coffee for her without being asked sometime in the summer, and neither of us had said anything about this arrangement because it did not require saying anything. On the wall above the workbench, next to a photograph I had found in my father's house after he died, Raymond Shaw standing in front of his body shop circa 1985, hands on his hips, the body shop sign visible over his left shoulder, there was a new piece of paper. A printed lap time sheet from the Thornfield Invitational. One line highlighted in yellow marker, the Camaro's fastest lap time from the third session, Monday, September 30th, 2024. In the bottom corner of the sheet, in Cooper's handwriting, fastest lap, Dad. Monday. I'd not put it there. I'd come into the garage the morning after we got home from Thornfield, and it was already on the wall, pinned with a thumbtack next to my father's photograph. I had not said anything about it. I did not need to. Cooper looked up from his homework at one point and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked at me. He said, "Can we take it to another track?" I said, "Which one?" He opened his green notebook to a page he had already prepared. He showed me 3 tracks within driving distance of Murfreesboro, with their circuit lengths and surface types and the dates of their next open track day events listed in his handwriting. I looked at the list. I looked at him. I thought about a 16-year-old in a body shop in Murfreesboro in 1997, learning to listen to things that most people couldn't hear. I thought about a 10-year-old handing me a socket at 2 in the morning because neither of us wanted to stop. I thought about what it meant to build something right and then let it do what it was built to do and then come back to the garage and start thinking about where to take it next. I said, "Let me see the dates." He slid the notebook across the workbench. Outside, the October light was doing the thing it does in Tennessee in the fall. Low and gold and patient, the kind of light that asks you to pay attention to what's in front of you before it changes. The garage smelled like it always smelled. The Chevelle was up on the lift. The Camaro was in its spot. Cooper was already making notes. "Before you go, I want to ask you something. Is there something you've been building? Something that other people have looked at and dismissed because they were looking at the wrong things, the surface, the appearance, the cost, instead of what's underneath? Most people never find out what their thing can do because they never put it on the track. What are you waiting to find out? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you today, if it stayed with you, share it with one person who needs to hear it. You already know who that is. And if you're new here, subscribe. Every week, a story like this one. Real people, real decisions. The kind that stay with you.